Episode 11 now. So, at time of recording, I still haven't put up the one from last week. So I'm looking today's Saturday morning, I still think, yes. I'm going to put up that one tonight. So this will be up Saturday. So that will be up Saturday evening. I'm aiming to get this one out for probably Tuesday or Wednesday, and then from next week we'll go back to weekend upload schedules. So obviously last week was about the Ballon d'Or. Today I'm going to speak about what I was planning to speak about a few weeks ago before I got sick. And that is the concept of replacement players, which led me on to other things and ideas which relate more to coaching. And I don't think anything I say here will really... It's not particularly anything different to what you maybe will have heard from before. I just wanted to speak about it and flesh it out a bit more than maybe I've ever done. So, let's be honest, nothing you ever hear now is really original. It's just someone fleshing it out in a different way. So, Christ, I have dark circles. So, the concept of replacement players. So, initially this was sparked by a conversation which I was having with someone in the DMs, and he spoke about just replacement players in general. And then I thought on the same day about the NBA, and they have a stat which is called VORP, so value over replacement player. And that essentially tries to quantify how much better you are than an easily obtainable player. So like in the NBA, for those of you who don't know, there's a minimum level contract, which is like a 1 year, 2 million, or 2 or 3 million or whatever. And that is for players who aren't very good, but they can do a job, like they can do something well. Usually it's shooting in today's NBA. And this stat tries to quantify how good any player is above that. So let's say LeBron James, how much better he is than a replacement player. Michael Jordan, Steph Curry, Magic Johnson, all these guys have this stat available to them. I don't quite know how far it stretches back. NBA stats usually stretch back, about 50, 60 years. So I'm not quite sure if Wilt Chamberlain will have it, but he might do. So you can find that on Basketball Reference if anyone is a nerd about things like that, because Football Reference doesn't quite have the same thing, and Pro Football Reference for the NFL, they also have their own version which stretches back further than Football Reference, because that's actually a very modern thing. I think it only exists since the 17-18 season. They've not got data in the form of a backlog. So, yeah. Now, there's no similar stat in football, like I said. And this exercise isn't that. Otherwise, it would just be ranking the best players in a slightly different context to how you normally would, which is how irreplaceable they are relative to market standards, in which case you would just have centralized hubs of players who do everything for their team. So Messi, Neymar, those types of guys would naturally be at the top of the ranking because they're the hardest types of players to find. But is the value they bring the highest? It's a whole different equation, and that's not what this exercise is. This is just sort of where the episode is coming from. So I've deliberately left out a couple of guys due to the fact that some people naturally get emotional to do with them, and also just because of the fact that sometimes the entire thing changes them because it comes as a shock, etc., things like that. It sort of messes up with the entire thing as well. So I've left out a couple of guys. The examples I use will more or less be... They're not obscure, but they're not the most obvious ones either. So the concepts of replacements, so they come from, a lot of the time it comes in fan discourse, and ultimately that's where it comes from, television discourse. So the fan discourse promotes the television discourse, which is ultimately what brings it into mainstream conversation. And it's how do you replace this and that? And the conversation is always, you're not going to replace him, you have to do it with this and this and this. And I understand that, but there's never any actual explanation as to how the guys do it. And some guys on Twitter make a good effort at doing it, whether it be through signing players for different positions or whether it be through altering the system or things like that. Usually it's a combination of all. So, for example, one fear among Liverpool fans for years has been the idea of Mo Salah leaving. So, Mo Salah probably since that season, his first one at Liverpool in 17-18, where he scored 40-something goals and he contributed about 15 assists or something insane like that. And he had 60 goal involvements in like 50-something games. The worry was that he is going to move on. He's going to leave Liverpool and go to a bigger club because of the fact that the best players play elsewhere. Now, I don't think he'd leave Liverpool because of the fact that I just don't view him as the type of player who a Real Madrid or Barcelona would have signed. He's not the right, not profile on the pitch, because he would be. Imagine him playing as a striker replacing Luis Suarez, or Messi going false nine and Salah going out to the right. It would work. Similar dynamic you could have at Real Madrid. He could have been Bale's replacement because Bale stopped taking football seriously after 2017, unless he was playing for Wales. Just, little things like that. But in terms of a off-the-pitch profile, Salah's Egyptian. He's not the best looking, and for Barca, especially when he had his little sideshow bob hairline. Real Madrid in particular care about things like that. Barcelona not so much, but if the quality is undeniable, then they will make the signing, but they still pay attention to it somewhat. For example, Ronaldinho, Haaland, things like that. But also, I just don't think Salah necessarily would be a fit in Spain and slam dunk the way some other guys were, because he was a bit of a late bloomer, and he's not a total superstar in the way some other guys are. But I digress. So the worry was that how do you replace that? And the talk was, well, we're not Man City. We can't just replace KDB we can't replace our Kevin De Bruyne with, different systems because because you have a whole array of depth and everything's built specifically, like a lot of the attack is built around Salah pinning the opposition defenders back and things like that. So a lot of people like to mention Mo Kudus now as the Salah replacement, even though he's not the same volume of goal scorer, because of the fact that he likes to play wider and centrally. He's a good dribbler and he's physically adept and things like that. I don't think that's the right way to go about things. I think that you should go. He's not the same profile even. I think you should be looking to alter system and signing from profile players and build it around that. To sign good players which fit together, which again I'll go into later, as opposed to trying to find a like replacement for a guy like Mo Salah, who's relatively irreplaceable. So, and even if we look at Liverpool's own blueprint for doing it, so if we take their front three from the back half of the 2018 season, 19 and 20. So 17-18, the final 6 months. 18-19 and 19-20, they had Luis Diaz, Cody Gakpo to come in to replace Sadio Mane. So their front three, obviously, I realise I messed up wording up. Mane, Firmino and Salah was their front three. Mane fell off a cliff after COVID. Firmino was still somewhat serviceable in 2021, but not really. And so ultimately you have to bring in new guys. So you bring in Diaz and Gakpo, and you bring in Nunes across time. They weren't all brought in across one window, of course. So Diaz and Gakpo were their Mane replacements, even though they don't play much like him at all. And Nunes was the Firmino replacement, even though he plays nothing like him at all. They're not remotely similar. If you want to argue that Diaz and Gakpo are similar-ish to Mane in certain aspects, sure, you can make that argument. If you combine them, then you get an approximation of what Mane brings. Nunes plays nothing like Firmino. So, what do they do by going... And I remember a lot of the talk was, we have to bring in a false nine type to replace what Firmino does. You aren't going to get the same value which Firmino brings, because Firmino at one point was the best striker in the world with his false nine game. You're never going to approximate that impact. It's impossible. So what's better? You sign a different player who you believe can reach a similar high level of quality, and then you balance it around that. Same thing with Diaz and Gakpo now. I don't think that Diaz and Gakpo were ever viewed as a long-term replacement for Mane. I do think Nunes was viewed as a long-term replacement for Firmino. But nonetheless, that's how things shook out. So it's on the recruitment team brings in the player who they believe can provide the same balance in the front three that you had before, even if they're not like-for-like replacements of the profile. So it's on the coach to find a fit in the balance. For example, even if you get a guy who's quite... So Aguero and Julian Alvarez, these are two guys now who... They're not the exact same, but they're both sharpshooters and they both play within the 18-yard box and they both can get a half yard for a shot, right? Those are all things which both of them are very, very good at. What Pep found is that you can't win if Julian Alvarez is your main striker. He's just not good enough. He has to be a bench player, which is why you bring in Haaland. Now, from memory, they brought them in the same window, but I might be wrong. I don't remember exactly. My phone's actually with me for once, so I can actually check this right now. See, I do these things so off the cuff. Very rarely do I do something pre-planned. So, Julian Alvarez. Now, he's not a bad player, right? I don't think he's very good. I think he's the type of player you can have as a starter on a title-winning team, but ultimately he's not awful. So, 2022, so he was brought the same season as Erling Haaland, and he was brought in the summer, I assume, yeah. And Pep knew that he wasn't going to be the guy, but he was your Aguero replacement, if you will. He was signed a year after Aguero left, and ultimately he's the guy who you ended up bringing in to replace that sharp-shooting impact guy off the bench. Pep didn't even like having him in his primary starting 11 a lot of the time because of the fact that Aguero is really overrated when it comes to link play. They're not similar at all, but they're both sharpshooters. But ultimately, the value one brings is not comparable to one the other brings. So even if you bring the same profile, it's not necessarily going to bring you the same results. Pep knows and understands this, which is why ultimately he decides to go in a different direction. Why ultimately, when he's replacing Haaland, he puts Foden false nine, or he just changes the whole system altogether. Another example, if we stay on Man City, is David Silva. So I remember Pep actually said this in a press conference. He said, we don't need to get a replacement for David Silva. We have Phil Foden. They're not anything like each other. But Foden often occupies the areas which David Silva previously would occupy. Why? Because when you get your players, you fit things around them. You put them in roles, and Pep does this maybe better than anyone ever in terms of the fact that he strips the fat away from your game. He strips the unnecessary things away that don't make you as valuable as you could be. For example, Erling Haaland. People complain about Haaland and the fact that he's not allowed to do other things. This is guys who watched him when he was playing in Austria and when he was playing for Dortmund. When he was marauding in transition, when he was dribbling, when he was just being a total wrecking ball with his ball carrying, because ultimately in semi-transition he does that better than most players, right? He stripped away the link play and the choppy and rough parts around the edges, and instead what did he do? He just made Haaland a complete wrecking ball around the 18-yard box. And ultimately that made him a guy who now can score 50-something goals, and he's not interrupting the general pattern of play in the middle of the pitch. So what Pep did with Foden is he took away all the unnecessary fat to his game. Now, do I believe now that Foden could be the same player outside of the Pep system? No, I don't. But ultimately, he took those unnecessary fats away, and he made him into a player now who he turns, he shoots, and he'll play the extra pass. That's it. That's all he'll do. Those are the things which he does. He does this very well. He sees the ball in half turn, he's a decent runner in behind. He just does those things super, super well, and he's almost neglected the other parts of his game, but it works for the Pep system, and he's going to win a bunch of trophies in this way for as long as Pep stays, and he stays. So you have the replacement, but they don't play anything alike. So is he a replacement? Yeah, of course he's a replacement. He's the guy who occupies that area now. He's the guy who takes David Silva's squad in the 11. No place in the squad, even though he doesn't play the exact same way. So what people have to understand is that replacements are rarely ever like for like. And again, this is not something that you would have necessarily heard before. No, this isn't something you necessarily wouldn't have heard before. It's just I wanted to flesh it out. So another good example is Manchester United. Cristiano Ronaldo. Ronaldo leaves in 2009. Who does Fergie bring in as his like-for-like replacement? As the guy who replaces his production from the wings? Antonio Valencia. And so ultimately, a lot of United's front line from 2007 to 2009, those three stretches, it was Rooney, Ronaldo, plus another guy. 2007, you had Sahar for a lot of the time, or you had Giggs. 2008, 2009, you had Tevez as the main piece. Then you had Berbatov mixed in there as well, and you also had Nani in there as well. So, but then in 2009, Ronaldo obviously goes, but who's the guy who comes in to replace Ronaldo? Who's the guy who comes in to replace the production that Cristiano had? It wasn't some other world superstar. It was a complete tinker. It wasn't Valencia with his 5 goals and 15 or 20 assists, whatever it was he'd bring. Who did he bring in? He had Rooney make a step up the pitch in terms of his goal scoring. Nani had more responsibility as a creator, as a do-it-all, as a scorer, as a winger. And Valencia is the guy who's doing all the creation. So this brings us to a whole separate debate of the work the coach has to do. The coach has to find, like I said earlier, the coach has to be the guy who platforms these guys. You can't just rely on getting the exact same player because, again, Cristiano Ronaldo in 2009, this is probably the best point, this post-2008, when he was the best player in the world, in 2009, this is, at that point in time, he still had his best case for being the best player in the world. I don't think he was better than Messi at that point, but if someone were to say that Cristiano was better than Messi at that particular point in time, I wouldn't argue. Because at the end of the day, he's still better physically. Messi hadn't taken the leap in terms of his playmaking. He wasn't the same goal scorer yet. Ronaldo had arguably took a leap in terms of his overall play in that following season as opposed to what he did in 2008. And Sir Alex Ferguson replaces him with a fella from Wigan. And a guy who's already on the squad. And another guy who's already on the squad. And what happens? United only gather 5 points less that season. And had Rooney not injured his ankle, there's a very high probability that United win the league that season as well. So they don't even miss a beat. And in 2012, if Nani doesn't rupture his ankle against Arsenal, United probably win that league as well. Or if they just don't lose to Wigan. So United were essentially 2 unfortunate injuries away from guys who don't really get injured that much, away from winning, and ultimately it was only a point. They were a point and 12 goals away from winning 7 league titles in a row. Do you understand how insane that is? Because they won 5 of the last 7 years that Fergie was there. That's ridiculous. No wonder everyone hates United and Ferguson. They're glad they're rubbish now. So you go from Rooney, Ronaldo, and Tevez. So Ronaldo being the scorer, Rooney is the guy who does a bit of everything, and Tevez is a guy who sort of runs and connects. And essentially United are 2 connectors. Then you go to Nani, Rooney, and Valencia. Nani is a guy who does a bit of everything. Rooney is a scorer, and Valencia is the guy who's a creator. The overall quality of that front line is drastically worse. But the sum of the parts was very close to the level which United had. Because in reality, if we just want to do it in terms of a scale of, if we want to rate all of these players out of 10, let's say Ronaldo's a 10, let's say Rooney's an 8.5, and let's say Tevez is a 7. What's Nani? A 7? 6.5? Valencia's what? A 6.5, a 7? And Rooney goes up to a 9. That's still, let's say 9, 7, 7. I mean, what's that? 23 out of 30. Meanwhile, United previously had a 10, an 8.5, and a 7. So what's that? 18.5, or 25.5. So in reality, even though one team is about 15%, 20% higher, and those are just numbers I'm pulling from the sky. You could easily argue Rooney's a 9 and Tevez is an 8. I wouldn't argue with it. What would that be? 27, right? Now you're arguing a thing which maybe 40% on individual quality is about 40% better, but ultimately the end outcome they achieved was very similar. It was very close. So, ultimately it's on the coach to maximise the guys who are in it. I mean, even if we look at Liverpool, right? Coutinho leaves. His replacement is who? Fabinho. Because you still have Wijnaldum, you still have Henderson. You bring in Fabinho. He's the guy who you replace Philippe Coutinho with. A number 6 to replace a number 10. And not just any old number 10. Probably the best number 10 that Liverpool had as a full-time number 10 in God knows how long. That's how special he was. Because Coutinho in Liverpool, especially those final 6 months he had there, the start of 17-18, is one of the most special players that we've seen. He was an absolute wizard. He's one of the best players you'll ever watch. They replaced him with a 6 and they got better. Why? Because if they didn't go out looking for a like-for-like number 10 Coutinho replacement. They decided, okay, we'll make do for the rest of the 6 months, and in the summer we'll get our replacement. And the replacement will be a number 6, and now we're going to change our system up because now we have the best defender ever. That's how it works. Speaking of the best defender ever, I remember reading a lot. When Matip was on the way out, and Joe Gomez was ultimately always being a crock, who's going to replace their ball-playing impact? Because Konate is not very good on the ball. What happens? Virgil van Dijk replaces their output on the ball because of the fact that now he takes more responsibility, and Trent Alexander-Arnold comes inside and he's the guy now who's receiving the ball from the centre-backs and he's helping initiate attacks. Those two, a tweak of system, they're what replaced the output that you have in terms of ball-playing centre-backs. Again, it's to do with the coach and the balance and the fit of the players around you. You don't need to go out looking for like ball-playing replacements. Because ultimately that's what a lot of people do. Remember, one common trouble that comes up with United fans is, how do we replace Lisandro Martinez's ball playing if we get another player in? Here's an idea. You get other players in who are maybe not as good on the ball, but you provide better protection around them and you have other players who can play on the ball. Instead of pairing Martinez, who's rubbish by the way, with a stiff Dosser in Varane who can't play on the ball but is an excellent defender, how about you sign 2 defenders who can both play on the ball to a decent level, so neither are total liabilities, and you also sign a left back who can stay healthy for 1 of 3 games in a row. So instead of, you're looking at it through a singular sole entity as opposed to looking at it through a holistic squad building viewpoint, which is ultimately what so many people fail to look at. So people complicate this far too much. They talk about coaches and their systems and their profiles and their attributes and this and this and this. In reality, all you need to get is players who balance and fit around each other. That's all football is. It's about finding guys whose skill sets complement each other. And as a result, they have multiple attributes which can fit around other guys, and you can mesh them all together, and now you get a super, super balanced 11 which can perform, and they can be greater than the sum of their parts. Because ultimately, Rooney, Ronaldo, and Rooney, Nani, and Valencia should not have been as good as they were. But because they fit and they played to their strengths, all of them. Rooney had to make the most sacrifice, funnily enough, because of the fact that he needed to be a guy who stayed at the pitch now. But all 3 guys played to their level, and they fit around each other because they all had scalable attributes. Now you can create something which is greater than the sum of your parts. Whereas if you look at, say, Messi, Mbappe, and Neymar, even though those are 3 10 out of 10 players, their attack as a whole was probably worse than Rooney, Nani, and Valencia. Do you understand how insane that is? But ultimately, when you get 3 guys who fit together and balance around each other, you now have multiple guys who fit and they elevate each other because of the fact that they have scalable attributes, whereas Messi and Neymar didn't at that point, with the exception of their passing. That's it. So it's on the coach to find the right balance, but at the same time, they need to get the right players in. It's not about like-for-like replacements. It's about bringing in guys who can fit adequately around each other. I mean, ultimately, even if I want to stick with PSG, I was going to touch on PSG a little bit later here. So they lose Messi and Neymar, right? They lose it in 2023, and everyone's worried is, where's the creativity coming from? They got no Di Maria, they lost him in 2022. They got no Messi, they got no Neymar. This is 3 all-time great chance creators. PSG scored 89 goals in one year, and he scored 89 goals in the other. 89 goals with the creators, 81 goals without the creators. And that's with the single most tumultuous year they ever had, because of the fact there was that dark cloud hanging over them the entire year of Mbappe's leaving for free, and Mbappe isn't going to re-sign, and Mbappe's holding bench now because of the fact that it's come from top down that he can't play because of the fact that we're only going to use him in the games where we absolutely need him because we need to secure the league and the title, but the league was already wrapped up because of Mbappe's efforts earlier in the year. That was their most tumultuous year, and still they only scored 8 less goals. Their output was what? 9% less? Because 89 to 81, that's about 9%, I'm assuming. So 9 to 10%. So ultimately, what you get... no, I think slightly more than 10%. That's going to annoy me now because my phone's right here. So at the end of the day, what you end up having is you need to find solutions. And obviously, it wasn't like for like because of the fact that Neymar, 91. So 9%, I was right in the first place. So what you end up getting is... you need the coach to balance. And again, see what I understand, because Galtier comes out, Enrique comes in, he never had to deal with Messi and Neymar on the same team as Mbappe, all these different types of things. But ultimately, still, the same principles apply, which is you need to have a coach which looks to maximize the whole sum of the parts. Now, did Enrique do that on the whole? That's a whole separate conversation. I had several issues with Enrique's coaching last season, but on the whole, this isn't about that. This is about the fact that you can still generate goals even if you lose some all-timers. You can still generate possession play from the back, even if you lose all-time great ball-playing centre-backs. All these different types of things, they all amalgamate together, and you can still have a very competitive team. So that's a big issue which I have. I mean, Ferguson did this maybe better than anyone in terms of, like I said, there's that one example. I mean, he loses Van Nistelrooy, who everyone knew was a set. Like, he scored 150 goals in 5 years for United. That's 30 goals each and every season. And I think he only played like 200 games or something. Like, he played 47 games a year, like maybe 43-ish, I'm assuming, and he scores 30 goals a year. One year he scored 40-something. I don't think he scored 20. I don't know. It all averaged out to about 30 goals a year. And the last season he barely even played, so he probably could have actually probably closer to 160 or 165. He missed a bunch of games that season due to his fallout with Fergie and Ronaldo. So he goes out. Everyone's wondering, oh, Jesus Christ, where are the goals going to come from? Ronaldo steps up, Rooney steps up because Ferguson platforms them in the correct way. Luis Saha comes in, he provides value, all these different types of things, and ultimately now you have a wonderful front line, which they don't need they don't need all these different extra pieces in place and all this system stuff and all this nonsense. They just need to balance, fit around each other, and be put in the correct environments, which doesn't have to be these super niche down things, which ultimately makes things a problem for the coach. Klopp did it, as I mentioned earlier, because with Diaz and Nunez as opposed to Mane and Firmino, even altering Salah's role to help fit those guys in. And Pep actually does it as well. People like to get on Pep. And like I said, he likes to strip the fat. He strips individualism, because a lot of the time that's what extra fat is to a player's game. He strips it all down. But ultimately, what he does works because he platforms those guys and they all work together very, very well. Let's take his first front line of Barcelona. And Henry, Messi, Eto'o. And 2 years later, he wins the Champions League again with Villa, Messi, and Pedro. Again, this is a similar principle to what you actually had with United at Ferguson. No, with United under Ferguson when you had Rooney, Ronaldo, Tevez. You have a super high quality front three, and on paper, these guys aren't as good. Henry, Villa. Henry is clearly better than Villa. 2009 Henry is still clearly better than 2011 David Villa. 2009 Henry is better than David Villa. Is that what I said? I think so. 2009 Sami Eto'o is clearly better than Pedro. Okay, 2011 Messi is better than 2009 Messi. Does that make it up? No, I'd still say that the 2009 front line was still overall better than 2011, even though Messi took a leap. But ultimately, he found guys who he could bring in, who could approximate the value, not the profile, the value of what those other guys did, and what did it bring? Now you have a side which can compete at the same level and they're the best team, and they actually might have been a better, more complementary, balanced unit than the 2009 team were. 2009, I believe, were better because they had more individual talent, but over the course of 50 game seasons, over the course of a 38 game league campaign, I would probably prefer the 2011 side due to the fact that there's more consistent, there's more balance, there's more steadiness in it. whereas the 2009 side probably relied a bit more on individual maverick genius as opposed to the other one. And Pep did the same at Manchester City as well. I'm not going to cover the specific iteration of City. I want to look back a little bit further. So if we look at 2018, where you had Sané, Aguero, and Sterling, that was Pep's first title. Sané's a left winger, Sterling's a right winger. So wingers on their preferred side, not cutting in, and then you have Aguero who's holding position in the middle of the box, and he's a sniper. And then in a couple of years down the line, now you have Sterling left wing, you have Bernardo off the right, and now you have Gabby Jesus as a false nine in the middle. That's totally different. That's a totally different setup. And okay, the players are probably of about equal level, right? I think Sané is better than Sterling. I think Jesus was better than Aguero. I think Sterling and Bernardo are about the similar level, right? Jesus being better than Aguero specifically for the City team, and Aguero being far past his physical prime. So, but either way, you can argue any of those any single way you want. I don't really have a problem. So, Sané, Aguero, Sterling, fine, whatever. And then you have Sterling, Jesus, Bernardo. Ultimately, you change the style, you change the fit. And instead of Aguero being the runner, Sterling's now the runner. Instead of Sterling being a creator, Bernardo's now the creator. But it's in a completely different way. He's coming inside, he's linking with De Bruyne, who goes on the outside, and he puts crosses into the box. I believe that was a mechanism to get more out of De Bruyne than anything else. But still, the frontline equation still remains the same. Aguero and Jesus, they're totally different types of strikers. Aguero's a guy who likes to play on the shoulder, generate a half-yard shot, and put it up. Jesus is much more drop deep, linking this, that. He's rubbish now because he's got no physical juice left. But nonetheless, before the injuries, he was a fantastic zippy player. I remember he was compared to Brazilian Ronaldo. He was compared to some of the best Brazilians you'll ever come across because of simply how good he was. That's how fantastic this guy was. It's always about achieving the correct balance within your team. You should never be worrying about replacing. You should be worrying about getting guys which fit in. Because at the end of the day, hell, the perfect example is Götze. Liverpool went after Götze and Brandt. These are two guys who are probably more highly touted than Mane and Salah. But ultimately, the other guys ended up turning out better. Why? Okay, they were individually better prospects, but at the same time, they fit in their lineup better than the other guys. Imagine you have a lineup of Götze, Brandt, and Firmino. That's not going to work. That's horrible. But now you get Mane, Firmino, and Salah. That's all of a sudden devastating. Even though, Götze had some sort of heart condition, Brandt, I never thought was all that regardless. But these guys who were highly touted prospects, one guy flopped it, and the other guy flopped in England. The other guy's playing for Southampton, who just had a 3-minute hat-trick. That's about it. Eyebrows raised, but at the end of the day, guys fit together, and it's on the coach to replace the guys who come out, and replace the guys who come in with better players. For example, look what happened with Raheem Sterling. Who was he replaced by, essentially? Firmino. Who on earth would have thought that Firmino would end up being better than Sterling? Who would have thought that they'd even be a comparable match? Because Sterling is a zippy, fast winger, who's a guy who likes to dribble and go at players and score fantastic, wonderful solo goals, particularly when he was at Liverpool. And then you get Firmino, who's a link playing, passing, creative 10. What happens? You completely shift the equation of what he is. He turns into a striker. Sterling is now a completely different player. At the end of the day, what coach's primary job, and this has turned into almost to a coaching ramble as well, you need to have guys who fit around each other, and you need to platform them in the best type of way. You can't just rely on individual players doing their part and trying to sign players who are maybe 80% and hoping for a similar output because you'll put them in the same system. No, it's stupid. You need to find the best players, get them in your team, and fit them around each other. That's actually an issue which I have with Arteta. And this will just be a little sidebar, if you will, because of the fact that because ultimately you've got a guy in Saka who's having to play for a lesser player, if you will, in Odegaard. And he has to play for that guy in Odegaard who's worse than him, even though I think the team would function better if Odegaard would move over to the left centre midfielder and Saka gets freedom to the right and he gets an overlap. So Odegaard doesn't go anywhere, but Saka gets more freedom and access to the rest of the pitch. So that's due to rigidity and things like that, due to his own philosophy and principles of football, because he wants a more bruiser on the left centre midfield side. Fine, okay. Because he wants to get that Xhaka replacement in. Now, ultimately, that's just a little sidebar. I don't think it's fair to judge Arteta on that yet, because he's not lost a star yet. He's not lost Saliba. He's not lost Saka. He's not lost Declan Rice. He's not lost Odegaard. He's not lost any of these guys and had the opportunity to replace him. I understand some of the guys have suffered injury this season, but that's not the same as flat out losing the guy altogether, which is a totally different equation. So, maybe it's not totally fair to tie on with that, but still nonetheless, those are some flaws and something which I think can hold teams back. So, the thing is, you need to adapt, you need to alter, and you need to innovate and protect your players. You need new ideas. to protect these guys and bring the absolute best that you can out of them. Otherwise, because like for like doesn't exist. Like even if I go back to Liverpool, the reason I use Liverpool and City is because of the fact that we all saw these things progress in real time. So it's not something which you can just view over a short period and you can't go profile player over 5 games. You have to watch these teams. Like, it's easier because we all saw these teams. Most of you who watched this were old enough to remember those Liverpool and City because they were just a few years ago now. They had Wijnaldum, Fabinho and Henderson. Then they have Thiago, Fabinho and Henderson. Wijnaldum and Thiago at that point were probably similar level players. That sounds insane to a lot of people, but trust me, they were, especially for winning teams, because Wijnaldum was a monster physically, he never lost the ball, and he also kept the unit compact. Thiago provided more penetrative nature with his passing, but Wijnaldum was better in bigger games due to his extra physical nature, things like that. But they're not the same player. The only thing similar about them is the fact that they would both remain central. They wouldn't go wandering, they wouldn't go drifting. Thiago is slightly better, albeit due to his extra physical level, but ultimately you adapt, you alter, and you protect those guys. You get guys tracking back more, you shift the coverage you shift the number 6 over to more protect that side as opposed to the other side this time, so Trent comes inside, and ultimately now you've protected Thiago, and now the weaknesses are gone. So even though that like-for-like replacement in the form of Wijnaldum isn't there, you have a guy who brings you more value on the ball as well as shifting coverages over and relying on the other individual pieces to protect that guy and make it so that the absence of the other guy isn't necessarily felt as much. This would have been where I cover the Mbappe thing, I ended up covering it later. It's on the coaches to find the solution to the replacements going. They have to find the best play. The club has to find the best players, not rely on the coach's individual eye. Magneto, Erik Ten Hag, bye-bye. So glad he's gone, he's rubbish. And then you have a guy in the form of a Klopp, a Pep, a Fergie, a Mourinho, who wouldn't go out looking for like replacements. You would find guys who are very, very good, who can approximate the value, and you can build pieces around them, which is ultimately all you need, because there's no such thing as a like for like. Simple, period, point blank. You can't do that. And if the coach fails to balance those things out and he doesn't find the right pieces in, let him go. Find a better one. It's that simple. Hire and fire until you find the right guy, until you find the right hire, and you can just build out from there. It's really that simple. Until you find that, let the guy go. Doesn't matter. So today's a much shorter one. This was only, I think, about 30 minutes in total, which I projected because I didn't think there'd be much for me to actually cover. And this is actually pretty stretched. I thought this would finish in about 20 minutes. A much shorter one today. In terms of, like I said, this will probably go up Tuesday, so you'll see this. I think it's international breaks anyway. I don't really think that a lot of you guys are really that interested in Nations League breaks. Obviously, there's a bit of a controversy over Mbappe. Bloody hell, this move's not startable, has it? So, I'm not going to cover that for a while, unless, if it gets to like December, January, then I probably will cover any issues. I have some theories as to why things are going wrong, but if you want my real-time thoughts on that, you can go to my Twitter, and I somewhat cover it on my TikTok as well. And then you can see what I tend to think of the situation at Madrid. But there are some things which I see and I need more evidence, things like that. And honestly, Madrid aren't doing very well. United have got Amorim though. So maybe my team's actually got a good coach for the first time in, a long time. Who was the last good coach there? Probably Mourinho. And even then, he was pants for his final 6 months as well because he fell out with the board. And Herrera, centre-back, man. Bloody hell, that was a unique experience. But yeah, we'll see what happens. Because this will be during the international break, and by the time we come back, what? Who do United even have after the break? I don't know. I'm really bad with fixtures nowadays. I used to know everyone who played for the next 8-9 games. Not anymore. But no, we'll have to see what happens. I am excited about Amorim though, because from what I hear, he's actually a good coach, and he seems like he has personality and charisma, and ultimately those things go down. Communication of your ideas is far more important than the actual ideas in football. I always believe that tactical nerds will always get found out. Look at De Zerbi, he's already trying to leave Marseille because he's pants. When it comes to actual communication of ideas. Oh, but he's a good coach. Yeah, but he also falls out with everyone. Who cares if he's a good coach? You can be a genius. If you can't get on with anyone, who cares? Look at Tesla. He never had any kids. He was always shy around women because he couldn't talk to them. All right. Now, I always have these weird, obscure examples that always tend to go to prove my point, but they always work. Okay, so what I would say here is we'll have to see what happens with United. With the two teams I largely follow. Liverpool are rather interesting. Hopefully by the time you've seen this, Arsenal have lost and Liverpool have won. Because I want Arsenal to be 10 points behind Liverpool. I don't want Arsenal to win the league. They're the most insufferable fan base, and they're also the stupidest. They're locked in an intense arm wrestle with United fans over who's the stupider fan base. But at least the rest of them, like, the only thing which makes Arsenal fans seem slightly more bearable at the minute is the fact that they're winning. They're a good team, when United are pants. Otherwise, both of them are just as insufferable as the other. It's infuriating. But no. So I hope you enjoyed it. And I mean, little moment to cap off the final 3 minutes or so. But yeah, if you have any specific topics you want me to cover, because a lot of these times I just end up making these. I end up having an idea through the week, and I end up fleshing it out not long before the episode, which ultimately what leads to 30+ minute episodes. I think this is definitely the shortest one. I think the shortest one I did before this was 45 minutes. So yeah, hope you enjoyed it, and I'll speak to you next time. Bye bye.